Okay, we are continuing Hilchos Ta'arovis. We're on Kuf Hey. Okay, continuing about the salted topic. Transfer Blia Yud Gimel. Seif Yud Gimel. Melach o Tavlin Shehem Ba'ke'ara Shel Basar Mutar Litnam Bechalav. If you have salt, we're talking about cold, dry salt and spices, and you're storing it in a fleisha container. No problem. You're allowed to pour from there and use it for milk, milchiks, whatever you need. Okay? Haga v'hu adin im hayu b'kli iser. Even if this is basically a continuation of yesterday, even if it's 100%, you could use any kli of mamish iser, not even heter beheter, right? Basar b'chalav separately is heter beheter. Even a mamish treif dish, you're allowed to store cold in there. The me'achar shehem yeveshim, since it's dry, einan, and it's cold, einan bole'im min akli. There's no blias going on. Rak she'aklihu naki. Obviously, the container, the kli must be clean, and minastam the shach. We know this. We learned this. The shach says it again. Minastam, we say all kalim are clean in general. Obviously, depends on the situation. Ve'ein iser davuk bo. There's no iser davuk over here. Ve'amachmer lechatchila tavo alav bracha. Obviously, our minhag is we use kosher dishes, and we try and stay away from using treif dishes. But if one gets stuck and is in a certain situation, a hotel, this place, that place, really, there's no problem. Okay, Yodalid. Melach habalua min dam. So now we're talking about salt that is full of blood. Right, you used it for. We're talking about the salt itself that is full of blood. Let's say you're using it to kosher meat, and now you have the salt. Kagon memelichas basar, v'natnu b'kadera. And now you're taking the salt. You took it off the meat that you salted, and now you're putting the bloody salt into a kadera, a pot. Oh, shenatnu b'kadera basar, or we're talking even to inside a tavshil. Now you're going to use this salt, this bloody salt, to give flavor to your stew that's on the stove. Oh, shenatnu b'kadera basar maluach below hadacha. Or you add a piece of meat that's been salted, so you have this very salty piece of meat, and you add it, you want to cook the meat now. You koshered the meat, and you salted the meat, but you still have, the salt wasn't rinsed off yet. So now it's covered in bloody salt. You throw in the whole piece of meat with the salt, without rinsing it off first. Big no-no. But the person did it anyway. Im yesh shishim keneged hamelach mutter. So all you need is shishim in the stew, in the pot that you have, has to be shishim keneged all of the blood. No, all the salt. Really, it should be only keneged the blood, but lamaisa, it must be, right, lamaisa lahalacha, it must be keneged all the salt, because we don't know how much blood is there. So it could be, we assume the worst, and we assume that every piece of grain of salt that you're looking at is really kulo blood. So that's in order to be batal b'shishim for sure. Otherwise, we have to be machmer. Okay. Haga. Let me keep reading. Haga. Alfa pisha hamelach adayin notein tam b'kedera. Okay. So now the Rama has an interesting thing. He says, let's say you have this bloody salt. The salt's full of blood. You add it to the pot. If you're looking at the volume, it's 100% batal b'shishim. The pot only has a tiny bit of salt. But that salt, because it's salt, it has a strong flavor, has a strong power, you still taste it in the pot, right? You know, when you cook something, you add flavor, you add salt. You don't put a lot of salt. You just need a little bit, and it affects the entire pot. So normally we said we have to be machmer for shishim or ta'am, whichever is worse. In this case, even though you taste the salt, it's not a problem, because the salt is not the iser, it's the dam that's the iser, the blood. Here, me'achar she'ein melech isur machmat atzmo. The salt itself is not iser, ela machmas dam shebetocha. it's really only the blood, where it only has to be shishim keneged the salt, because we don't know how much blood is there. It's really shishim keneged the dam. The kol makom, and then the Rama continues a principle related to this. The kol makom she'ein ha'oser yachol leilech sham. Whenever the iser itself, in our case the blood, can't go there, ein ha'ne'esar oser yoter min ha'isuro. The medium, the salt, can't be worse than the blood itself. And since the blood doesn't give flavor if it's batel b'shishim, so too the salt is not going to give, because it's... All right, I think we said it already.
Even though we hold Atipanas Medela by Shar Yisurim, is this a call even in Chana?
This would be even in Hanan. Good question. How that applies to Hanan.
Is he saying that there is no Chana in the case of salt? Because the salt isn't really it's only mixed in?
It sounds like this case, you don't apply the general rule of Hanan, is what it sounds like. It wasn't cooked. It wasn't cooked. It was only balua of dam. Good question. Good question. Okay. Let's go on. We'll leave that as a good question. Okay. Kuvav. Siman Kuvav. Heich mevatlin b'shishim. So how do we mevatl b'shishim? What does that mean? Aleph. Chaticha shabala eser. This might elaborate to the previous case. If you have a piece of meat and now it absorbs some iser in there, ve'ein ba shishim levatlo, and you don't have shishim to be mevatl it, shenafla lekadera, eino oseret. Okay, so then it's not going to become aser if it doesn't have. Sorry, eino oseret ela lefi cheshbon iser shaba. So you have a piece of meat, and it became aser because of a blia of iser. And now, it could only be aser the next thing when you add it to the pot, keneged, not the whole item, but only keneged the iser shaba. Right now we're in the Shulchan Aruch, and he only doesn't hold of chanan by Shar Yisurim. So let's keep reading. She'im yesh b'ma shebekadera mitzuraf im hachaticha atzma shishim keneged iser habelua ba muter ma shebekadera. So if you have a pot of food, liquid, vegetables, whatever, meat, doesn't matter, and you add a piece of meat that has a blia of iser. So that piece of meat wasn't batel b'shishim. That piece of meat's 100% aser. You can't eat it. Because the iser, it wasn't batel b'shishim when it got into that meat. Now you add that piece of meat to the pot. So now, do you need shishim of other stuff in the pot, keneged the blia, or keneged the whole chaticha? So according to Shulchan Aruch, only keneged the blia, and not only do you look at the content of the pot, you can even add the meat itself against that chaticha, against that little piece of iser. Right? This is according to the Shulchan Aruch, who doesn't hold of chanan. Bashar Yisurim. Aval chatichat atzma asura. However, even the Shulchan Aruch agrees that chaticha itself is aser le'olam va'ed. There is nothing you can do about it. Lefi she'isur sheba eino niflat mimenu legamre. That iser that got absorbed in the chaticha, even if you cook it into another pot, that blia is never going to leave that chaticha completely. So therefore, it's always going to be iser in that chaticha, and we're always going to have to assume the worst, that it's not batel b'shishim. Even if part of the blia leaves, it's never going to leave enough that it's batel b'shishim. And this is the din of efshar l'sochto, that's aser. This is in the Gemara discussed, it's all machlokas. But lahalacha, everybody holds. You see here, the Shulchan Aruch, the Rama, Shach, Taz, Grab, Pri Chadash, Kaf HaChaim, everybody holds, there's no machlokas, that once an item becomes iser, efshar l'sochto aser. It's never able to be removed. Okay. And then, so this is not related, not kashur, it's not dependent on whether you hold of chanan or not, by Shar Yisurim. Again, it could be, depending how you learn the sugya, but Lamaisa, there's no connection whatsoever according to the Shulchan Aruch. And the Ramaz Machmer Lechatchila we know by Hanan by Shari Yisurim. Okay.
So food won't give up their bliya,
The item itself will never give up all of its bliya.
but a pot will, and utensils will. That's all point of kasher.
You can kosher a pot. That you can do.
But you can't kasher food.
Can't kosher food. Okay, well, okay, good distinction. Udelo k'moshe katav le'el siman sadi bet af oto chaticha muteret. Right. So it is a question, but this is the halacha. The efshar l'sochto aser. Ma she'en kein b'davar hanivlal v'nimuach. So that points out that's because it's a chaticha that became iser, and so therefore it's going to always be stuck in that chaticha. But if immediately there was never a chaticha, there is iser that fell into a liquid. So it could be now it's not batal b'shishim in this particular case, but she'im nafal dam uchayotze b'latoch rotev shel heter v'asro machmat miuto. Let's say you have a little bit of blood or a treif liquid falls into a small pot of soup, and it wasn't batal b'shishim, but it got mixed in to the liquid immediately, right? Everything's liquid to liquid, but it wasn't batal b'shishim. So now that entire pot is aser. Everything that's in that pot now becomes aser because it wasn't batal b'shishim. But v'achar kach nitra beharotav shel heter. But later on, now there became more contents. You added more food, more liquid, more items into that pot, where now it would be. But now there is shishim in that pot, more than the isser that dripped in. Let's say in our case it's blood. Kulo mutar. Now everything is mutar. She'akol nivlal v'nit arev, because it was all mixed in. There's no chaticha that became aser. Efshar l'sochto is doesn't squeeze out of that chaticha. But okay, let's go on. Is it here? I just want to quickly point out an interesting case the Gilyon Maharsha has. Okay, it's in the Al Maharsha. He points out, let's say you have a piece of meat, a potato. Well, not. The case is not a piece of meat. Let's say a piece of potato. You have a parva item, and now it's nivla, some meat. It's a piece of meat you got cooked together with a potato, and then you take out the potato. So there's ta'am of meat in that potato. So that potato, we would consider it fleshik, right? But if that potato falls into a whole pot of milk, and immediately the bliya of basar is batal b'shishim to the milk, so then that potato is not basar b'chalav, because it was heter beheter, and it was always, from day one, it was shishim kenegdo, so it never became an isser of basar b'chalav. So he quotes the Shach Taz, who says it's mutter lechatchila to eat that potato. I know most of our wives would throw it away, and that is the crazy Uplesi who says it's better to be machmer, but I think the halacha would follow the Maharsha Shach and Taz. Okay. Haga, olafi. According to the Ramah, he says, I hold of Chanan b'shar Yisurim. Ein chiluk bein davar lach ledavar yavish. It makes no difference if it's a davar lach or davar yavish, because even lach belach we say Chanan. Ala inyan zeh, although we're going to see an exception. Ala inyan, I'll just say. Let me keep reading. Ala inyan zeh. In this case, it would be a little different. Imanesa kvarhu davar yavish, yesh shishim kenegdo. If the item itself is already davar yavish and it's yesh shishim kenegdo, hachaticha neser tchila nisheret b'isura. V'tzarich la'asira misham im makira. So you have to remove it from there. V'im eno makira betela. But if you can't be makiret, you don't know which is the iser, so then it's mutter. Imeno chaticha harili is chabed. I'm assuming it's not a chaticha harili is chabed. Okay, since the whole thing now became shishim kenegdo and you can't recognize it and you don't know which one to take out, it's fine.
You're saying Hanan is batal, and if you can't recognize it,
Or if you
even
can't, right.
right? So we don't say Hanan is Ein B'Tela Tula.
Well, here he says, if it is a chaticha rasul is chabed, he is machmer. Here he is machmer. If it is a chaticha rasul is chabed.
Yes.
Right. But by Hanan, by an Isser Balua, and you can't recognize the.
Right, but if it were actually like, if it were the akhbar and little pieces of it, then the whole thing would, then it would be awesome.
Okay.
In the case of the Hanan, the Belia, it's more different.
Right.
There's a chiyuv to remove.
That's machmat atzma, the akhbar.
There's a chiyuv to remove, but the rules of difficulty apply.
Okay. Right. So, right. I don't want to compare machmas asma of chatichas akhbar nevela versus this. That's exactly the difference. V'im hu davar lach hakol muter me'achar dika shishim neged ma shene'asar techila. And okay, this is just it's kind of saying what we said already. If it's all davar lach, then it's okay. And just to point out, normally we do say here. We don't say Hanan whenever it's lach belach b'shar isurim behefsed gadol. If it's lach belach, we do say Hanan according to the Ramah b'shar isurim. Unless it's hefsed gadol, then he's mekel, like the Shulchan Aruch. That's the Ramah and the Shach. The case of lach belach is, let's say you have dam or treif liquid mix in, let's say in a cup or a spoon, a small cup or a spoon. You have kosher chicken soup with a drop of blood. And now they cook together, right? Assuming it's atziletabo, whatever it is, klirishon. Now, that mixture of dam and chicken soup, the whole thing becomes chanan. And now, if that gets mixed into your chicken soup pot, you need shishim, not keneged the dam, but keneged the entire, what was ever in your spoon. So that'd be a case of chanan by liquids.
In that case, it's batal. If there is shishim, then it's batal.
If there's shishim afterwards, so the Ramah holds no, you still have to be only behefs and maruba. You could be it's keneged the dam. Otherwise, you have to. It's not bata. He says chanan by davar.
But if there's shishim keneged the spoon.
Oh yeah. If it's shishim keneged the spoon, it's fine. But really, that's the whole. The din of chanan means it has to be keneged the spoon, not just a drop of blood. So that's enough nafka between the Shulchan Aruch and the Ramah. But behefs and maruba, he's mekel by davar. I forgot where. I think you'll see that in the Shach and Daled. That's one place, and we've seen it, and I think it's here. Okay, let's keep reading. I'm going to see. This principle that we just meant is going to come up a couple times in this with the spoon in the next couple simanim. So let's read. Bet. I think that's where we're holding. Okay, bet. Now you have a piece of meat that has a piece of fat attached to it. And it got cooked together. So immediately it was batal b'shishim. It never became chanan. It never became aser. They have a piece of meat attached to a piece of chaylev, right? And an animal, the chaylev is attached to the meat, unless you cut it apart. And right, usually it's shuman lamaisa, but theoretically it could be chaylev. So then you throw the whole thing into the pot together. But when you put it in the pot, immediately the pot is bigger than that little piece of chaylev that's attached to your meat, right? The butcher didn't remove the chaylev properly. He got rid of most of it, and you notice there's a piece of chaylev attached to your meat, and you notice that after it went into the whole pot. But from day one, the pot was more than shishim, right? The contents of the pot was more than shishim than that piece of chaylev. So what happens? So now the whole food is everything in the pot is kosher. Even we're going to see Bachlokas Shulchan Aruch Ramah. According to Shulchan Aruch, even that piece of meat is 100% kosher. Because it didn't cook separately with the chaylev. and never became chanan. Okay, so fine. So tzarich lizaher shelo yasir shum. So the question is, how do you remove it from the pot? The halacha is simple. We just said the halacha. Now the question is, how do you remove it from the pot? It's on the pot and it says it's boiling, simmering, it's hot. Tzarich lizaher shelo yasir shum davar me'akadera be'od chaticha se'isr v'tocha. You have to be careful. You cannot remove anything from the pot right now, because you're going to create a problem. Okay. If you were able to remove, well, let's keep reading. I think he'll explain himself. What are we worried about? If you start removing things from the context, from the contents of the pot, Shema tisha'er ba'achrona b'sha'a she'ein b'kader shishim levatel ha'chelev. What might happen? You start ladling or pouring things out of the pot. Well, it's not happening all at once. Well, that's the case that you can't do. You can't do it where it's all at once. I mean, you could do it all at once. But let's say you're going to pour it out slowly, and kiluach, whatever. Or you want to ladle it out. If you start taking out some of the contents of the pot, at some point you're going to reach where there's not shishim keneged the chelev. So maybe the chelev is in the pot. It's going to be one of the last things that come out. So what's going to happen? It's going to usher everything that's in the pot once you start to empty the contents. So you have to wait for it to cool down. And you can't, and that's if it's at the end. Now what if the chelev comes out in the very beginning? So now the chelev is going to osir the stuff that comes out at the beginning.
I think it's about the original piece that fell out, but the chelev is still attached to it.
Right. So the main problem so what I just said is true, but the main concern right now is, let's say you want to take out piece by piece. If the first piece, if you take out any of the pieces by itself, that could be the piece that's attached to the chelev, or it is, or you're not sure, let's say. And when you take it out, it's attached, it's hot, and it's attached to the kosher piece of meat. And until now, that kosher piece of meat was still kosher. As soon as you take it out, it's hot and it's touching the chelev. So that piece of meat is going to become treif. It's going to come aser. So according to the Shulchan, you can't do this. The only option you have is to wait and take it out once the pot is cold, and there's not going to have a blia from the chelev onto that piece that it's attached to. Now, according to the Ramah, so this halacha is a little different. In fact, the Shach points out, you want to take out that chelev piece of, you recognize it, you want to take out that piece that's attached to the chelev immediately, because he holds, the Ashkenazim hold, there's an Isser Davuk, it's attached, so 100% from the first second, when it's hot, that chelev that's touching the meat is going to make the meat treif, because the Shulchan Aruch doesn't hold a visser davuk, and now that piece of meat is chanan, and you don't want to leave treif in your pot longer than you have to. So the best thing to do is to take it out immediately, because even if you wait, it's not going to help you anything. That piece is chanan, and that piece is always going to be aser. So according to the Shach, take it out right away and then you're good to go. If you mind, the Kaimlan Chatikasna says in Avela, Meisira Chaticha Asura Misham V'Hasha'ar Mutar. And the question is, do you need Shishim Keneged? The Shach and Pri Megadim clearly say, according to the Ramah, Menaga Ashkenaz, because of Isser Davuk, that entire Chaticha becomes Chanan. And so that whole pot needs to be Shishim Keneged the entire Chaticha with the chelev.